And welcome back. Soaring incarceration rates fail to make communities safer, deepening racial and economic inequalities, and breaking apart families and draining public resources. Secretive databases disproportionately target Black and Latino residents, increasing surveillance and violating civil rights without reducing crime. Community-driven alternatives and policy reforms offer more promise in cutting violence and rebuilding trust. Joining me now, we've got the Managing Director of Policy at the Bronx Defenders, Brittany A. McCoy, and thank you for being with me.
Thank you for having me.
And continuing on this conversation, because as we look and we see, the numbers don't seem to be getting any better, do they?
No, they don't seem to be getting any better. And we see this over-incarceration of Black and brown people, specifically in the Bronx, New York, not having, it's a very deep emotional toll that people are feeling when they're seeing this over-incarceration and seeing people being taken away from their homes from a system that continues to target us by a zip code, by how we look, by the neighborhoods that we come from, by the friends that we have, and it's not contributing to the overall goal that the NYPD says that they have, which is public safety.
Yeah. When we hear about high incarceration, we hear about these numbers. I mean, the first thing that people think about is, first of all, the injustice, right? And that's the injustices done to the individual. We're not talking about people who've committed the crimes. We're talking about these bogus arrests and things that continue to happen. However, when we look at the numbers and the statistics the way that they are, there's a heavy impact that happens in inner city communities across America.
Yeah.
Give me a little bit of a breakdown about what this incarceration does for communities, particularly the inner city.
Yeah, so, this is racial profiling, right? Just to call it what it is.
Right.
And when you have this racial profiling and the way in which it impacts our communities, it doesn't just take a toll on the person itself, it takes a toll on the entire community. So when you have somebody who's taken away from their family by the system, right? You may have a child who is losing a parent overnight. You may have a caregiver, a parent who has to become a single caregiver overnight. You'll have grandparents or family members who have to step in and help. You may have a community who will lose like a neighborhood basketball coach or a mentor to people who are on the block. And it's a deep emotional toll that people are feeling day in and day out. That's on a micro level. When you look at it on a macro level, you see the systemic oppression and how it's impacting our community overall. When people are arrested, it can impact every part of their lives, right? You have millions of people who may lose their voting rights. You have millions of people who may lose the right to be able to serve on a jury trial. You have millions of people who will lose access to better jobs, better housing. You see this every day, day in and day out in the work that we do. So it has this micro level and macro level impact on communities specifically that look like ours in the Bronx.
What are we seeing by way of retaliation and response, right? Because communities are speaking out against over-policing, communities are speaking out against the mass incarceration. How are communities fighting back?
Yeah, I think so. There's always going to be some sort of retaliation when you're fighting against a system that wasn't designed for us, right? It wasn't built for us to succeed in the first place. But we have people who are really raising their voices, making sure that we say that this is wrong, right? That's the first step. This is not okay. This shouldn't happen in our communities. We have legislation that's currently on the table. The wonderful council member, Althea Stevens, she is sponsoring a bill right now in City Council. It's called Intro 798. And this is to make sure that there will be an abolishment of the gang database as it stands right now. And the NYPD has this database that they use that really impacts communities of color like ours. It's 99% filled with Black and brown people, right? And it's utilized to racially profile as this high tech tool that is masked and as if it is a tool of public safety when it really is just cloaked in racial profiling, like a stop and frisk almost 2.0, right? And that's how people are speaking up and speaking out through legislation, through advocating, through going to their city council members or state assembly members and saying this is not okay. It's not okay for public safety to be masked in this way that is going to target and over-police our communities in a way that it's happened for decades. This is not new.
Right. And you also talk about making sure there's transparency when it comes to these police databases.
Yeah.
For someone who may not be so familiar, break down what the police databases are and why you're calling for transparency.
Yeah, so it really actually isn't clear how one gets on the database, right? We've heard instances where people are on the database who are as young as 13 years old, and you can be entered on the database for wishing someone a happy birthday on social media, for living in a certain public housing complex, for living on a certain block, for wearing a certain color, right? And this criminalization of being in a gang, and to be very clear, being in a gang is not a crime, right? People have their opinions on what being in a gang may look like, but it is not a crime on its face. And this database is not transparent because people don't know if they're on it or not, but it is used against them if they are ever arrested, if they are ever in front of a judge. It can be used against them when they're being up for bail. It can be used against them in many different instances. So there's no transparency on even how someone is even able to get off of this database when they do find out they're on it, right? So there's just this lack of transparency of what this even means, but the NYPD is using this as a tool to say that they need it to be able to protect our communities. And we don't understand how it's protection when there's no transparency. It's really driving a wedge.
So conceivably, I can end up on a database tomorrow without any notice? Or
no notice.
Right.
No notice. You can end up on a database for the neighborhood that you live in. You can end up on a database for knowing a particular group of people. You may even end up on a database for throwing up a particular sign that may be like, you know, I'm in a sorority, so
right.
like we have a particular symbol that we throw at them. I'm not saying that would end up on a database, but it could actually.
Yeah, and that's worrisome all in itself.
Yes.
So, as we talk about this here, obviously your work continues, right?
Yes.
What's at the forefront of the work that you're doing right now?
I would say, you know, we're a holistic office, so we really are looking at everything and how it impacts the people that we care about every day in the Bronx community. I would definitely say the work that we're doing right now, we're discussing in regards to making sure that Black and brown people in the Bronx aren't being over-criminalized, aren't being over-policed, and we rarely care about access to resources, making sure that people have the things that they need to make sure that public safety, when we talk about public safety, that's investment in housing, right? That's investment in jobs. That's investment in our young people who make sure this city runs. That's our future. So that's the work that we're really focusing on right now in a legislative aspect and a community aspect as well.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so much out there right now, right?
Yeah.
And in this election season, has it been a little bit harder to get the ball across the finish line?
I mean, I think every season has its challenges, to be completely honest, right? We're under a new federal administration that does make it very difficult to do the work that we do. We have an administration that doesn't believe in the fact that there is racial profiling, that doesn't believe in the fact that Black and brown communities are being over-policed or over-criminalized. We have an administration that doesn't believe in abiding by the law, period, right? And we're a legal organization and we believe in abiding by the law and creating laws where they are complicated and complex to make sure that they are speaking to the needs of the community first. So every season has its challenges, but we continue to move forward and push forward for the things that we believe in, because even if it doesn't get across the field this year, there's always next year.
Right. As we look at ICE, we see a lot of work that's being done, ripping people away from their families, right? Children being ripped away from their families. There is a parallel, because when you look and see what goes on with the mass incarceration of Black and brown people, children are literally, in another type way, being ripped apart from their families. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so I mean, and this is the beautiful part of our work at the Bronx Defenders. There's always this interconnected nature in the things that we do. Even when we talk about the over-incarceration of Black and brown people, when we're talking about mass incarceration, the Office of Family and Children's Services actually did a study, and they found that there are 100,000 children in New York City that have at least one person in jail or prison. Over 100,000 children. So when we talk about the impact of tearing people apart away from their families, it's a devastating impact, and it makes a devastating toll on the communities that we say that we serve. So when we look at it in the criminal legal system, when we look at it in immigration, what we're seeing is this intentional dismantling of the family structure in our communities, and the law is being weaponized as the way to say that our family structures do not matter, and the over-incarceration actually matters more.
Yeah. Where do we go from here?
We keep advocating. We keep fighting. There's always another season. There's always another day. I always tell people, to make sure they're raising their voices. We're really pushing for, the passing of this bill that that City Council member Althea Stevens is pushing for, because this is really going to be a step forward in the right direction. On the community aspect of things, the Bronx Defenders, we do host a lot of community events. Our community engagement and community organizing team, they do great work. And that's a great part of our organization. People sometimes see us as the legal organization, and they may not think about us in the factor of the community work that we do or the policy work that we do. But our community organizing and engagement team, they have a center that's called The Block, which is the Bronx Leadership and Organizing Center. And they're holding a Youth Justice Summit next week, I believe, on May 28th, which is for young people, speaking about the cradle to prison pipeline. We believe young people are the backbone of society. They are who are going to take us from this place to another place, and that will be an opportunity for young people to get involved as well.
I think about one of the things that you do, and that's really building bridges, right?
Yeah.
And that bridge between police and community.
Yeah.
It's a big bridge that needs to be built, and I mean, I've been sitting behind this desk for, right? And that's a conversation that's always had. However, when I think about it, there has to be that bridge built if there's ever going to be trust, right? So how are you working on that, and what are you seeing in that area? Because if we're talking about police-community relations, this is very necessary.
Yeah, I think that's difficult because when you have a system and we have an NYPD that uses databases and other tactics the way in which they do, and we speak out and we say we want transparency, we want our lives to be valued, right? It shouldn't be based off of a zip code or an area that we come from, that there is this there's this assumption that we are less than, or we deserve to be surveilled, or we deserve for our constitutional rights to be stripped. So I really turn that question really on to the people who are doing the things to our community, because I think that in order to rebuild trust, if there is going to be a rebuilding of it, it should come from the people who are doing the damage. It shouldn't be on the people who are being harmed to have to take the lead on that.
Yeah. What things should people be taking notice at when it comes to this police-community relationship? Because I think that so many times we are quick to jump on one side or the other here. But what should people really be paying attention to if we're going to build effective bridges?
Yeah, I think we have to focus on the fact, right? And the facts are that there's harm being done, right? That's foundationally. There's harm being done. If we are going to move forward in a way that says that we value the lives of everyone, then we have to remove tactics and practices and not cloak them in this public safety narrative that there has to be a stripping of the things that we desire or care about for people to be safe, right? So that has to happen first. There has to be an overall acknowledgement. It's like when someone harms you, right? In order to be able to move forward, you have to first acknowledge the thing that happened. And right now, it doesn't feel like there's any acknowledgement of the thing that's happening. And when people speak out, we want to make sure that they feel empowered to do so and that their voices are going to be heard. Yeah.
Voices being heard are very, very critical. Incarceration.
Yes.
Right. I know you'd spend a lot of time in that area, right?
Yes.
And really, when we think about incarceration, these numbers that continue to rise. We're seeing more of our brothers and sisters still behind bars, but yet and still for those families that are being affected, what support is out there for those persons? Because for some families, it's their first time dealing with this incarceration situation, right? In other situations, maybe they have somebody that's being consistently incarcerated. But there's often that saying that, listen, when a person is incarcerated, that person's not just incarcerated by themselves. Their family's incarcerated, their community's incarcerated. So with the work that you do, talk to us about how families are supported even in incarceration. Yeah,
I mean, one of the things that we really work on is building community. You talked about building those bridges. We want to make sure that people are reaching out to their, representatives, their state assembly members, their city council members to see what resources are available within their own specific communities and districts. When we talk about the advocacy level and what people can do to talk about their experiences, what the system wants us to sometimes feel like is that we're in a silo, right? And what community does is it allows us a place to be able to raise our voices and say, hey, this is happening to me. How did you deal with it? What was a resource that you utilized? If you have a child who may be going through a really traumatic situation because they lost, a brother, or they lost a father, or they lost a mother or a family member, by being incarcerated or being in the system, does this child need therapy, right? Does this child need an after-school program to be able to go and, release whatever stress they may be dealing with? So we really want to encourage people to build in community, because the silos is what makes us feel so isolated by the system.
Yeah, I think about so many families that are really impacted by this in such a traumatic way.
Yeah.
With so many people being incarcerated, it has to make your job a whole lot more. Talk to me about this, and I'm not trying to be political, but I am going to make the statement. Since this last presidential election, how much more has come through your door?
I mean, we had a lot more come through our door. I'm from the Bronx, born and raised, so, all of these issues are deeply personal to me. I've had family members who have been impacted by the system. I have friends who have been impacted by the system on micro and macro levels. And what we've seen at the Bronx Defenders over the time that this new administration has been in place, specifically in the immigration sector, we've been doing a host of Know Your Rights trainings because we have people who are fearful of their lives, right? We hear stories of parents who are fearful of sending their children to school because they're afraid that they'll be kidnapped, literally kidnapped from them. They're afraid of seeking out medical services because they're unsure if they go to the doctor, if their addresses or names are going to be shared in a way that would be harmful to their community. So what we're dealing with a lot of is the fear that is happening, right? Because people are very scared. They're unsure if they're going to be able to come back to their homes at night. And that's not a fun place to be in, especially when you give so much to this community. There's this narrative that, the immigration population just takes away from this community. And that's not what it means to be New York City. That's not what it means to be a New Yorker. I went to college in Virginia, right? We always hear about New York City being this melting pot. And if we're going to be a melting pot, we're a melting pot for all people, right? And we don't get to just say people are not extracting, right? And so we want to make sure that we're protecting, and we want to make sure that people feel safe to go home at night.
Yeah. Pretty great conversation. Continue the great work that you're doing.
Thank you.
And certainly we got to have you back again so we can talk more.
Of course.
All righty?
Yes, thank you.
Much needed. All righty. Listen, everybody, taking a quick break. Guess what? We got more coming up right after this.